History tells the story of the world and of our lives. Sometimes that history goes bump in the night. Broadcasting from the center of oddity and the supernatural in Central Florida, it's the History Goes Bump podcast.
Hello, you spooktacular people. Welcome to History Goes Bump, a Redux. I am your host, Diane.
And this is Kelly.
Kelly, on this episode, we're going back to a location we did, I think, back in 2015. This is Raynham Hall in New York. There are two Raynham Halls in the world. There's this one in New York, and then there's Raynham Hall over in Great Britain. Have you ever seen the picture of that ghost from way, way, way back in the day that's on a staircase? And it looks like a woman who's kind of in a dress.
Oh, yeah, I think I know which one you're talking about. Mm-hmm.
It's a very famous photo. That is supposedly the Brown Lady of Raynham Hall. That's not this location, but this location is also haunted. And the two are sort of connected to each other because I believe this one was named after the other one. And the Townsend family had owned Raynham Hall over in Great Britain. There's a family who had owned this one in New York, Townsend, but they're not supposedly related to each other.
Interesting.
So anyway, that's what we're going to cover on this episode. Are you ready to go back?
I'm ready. Raynham Hall in New York looks like a typical colonial-style house, but people claim it is the most haunted house in Long Island. The home has a colorful history that includes the Revolutionary War, British occupation, and a spy ring. The house has changed ownership many times over the years and been refurbished and added to through the years. Some of the former occupants have decided to stay on in the afterlife. Join us as we explore the history and hauntings of Raynham Hall.
The city of Oyster Bay was first settled by the Merrick Indians, which were one of the 13 tribes of the Algonquin family. Their territory was on the southeast of the Rockaways. The first European settlers here were the Dutch. Captain David Peterson de Vries led the first group, and he wrote of the settlement, came to anchor in Oyster Bay, which is a large bay which lies on the north side of the Great Island. There are fine oysters here, whence our nation has given it the name of Oyster Bay. So now you know how it got its name. The English came a couple decades later, and the boundaries between the Dutch and English were very fluid. They didn't really get along with each other, kind of some fighting back and forth about this is our territory, that's your territory. Many of the Dutch settlers were Quakers. One of those Quaker families was the Townsend family. They came to Oyster Bay fleeing religious persecution. Their family had deep roots in the shipping business. Oyster Bay received its charter from England in 1667 after the Dutch relinquished control, and within 20 years, all the land still owned by the indigenous people had been sold.
Samuel Townsend was born in 1717. He was 23 years old when he moved from Jericho, New York to Oyster Bay. He purchased land there in 1738 that would provide him better access to the waterfront. He was building a shipping business with his brother Jacob, and this location would be perfect. The property already had a house built on it by a man named Thomas Whedon. This was a 4-room frame home initially, which meant the house was built with 2 rooms on the first floor and 2 rooms on the second floor, and there was a central chimney. This proved to be too small for Samuel, and so he added 4 more rooms to the north side of the house. The home was considered to be of the salt box style. That style referred to homes built with a wooden frame and a pitched roof that slopes back farther in the back. So basically, the rear roof is longer than the front roof. Salt was kept in boxes like this, thus the name. He dubbed it the homestead, and it officially became known as the Townsend homestead. The reason the home became too small was because Samuel married Sarah Stoddard, and they ended up having 8 children.
The shipping business flourished, and by 1765, the Townsend brothers owned 4 ships and were sailing them to far-off locations like South America, the West Indies, and Europe. The ships exported goods like rum, fabric, and molasses along with lumber. Samuel also imported goods and decided to set up shop as a merchant from his home. As his business grew, Samuel grew in prominence and he decided to get involved with politics. His first government position was as Justice of the Peace for Oyster Bay. As the drumbeat of revolution grew across the colonies, Samuel took part as a member of New York's Provincial Congress, serving from 1774 to 1777. When the Revolutionary War was over, Samuel became a state senator for New York.
Samuel's endeavors during the Revolutionary War and his loyal patriotism made life very dangerous for him and his family in New York. The British occupied much of New York for a substantial amount of time. Many people found themselves on prison ships where they would die. It is estimated that 10,000 people from New York died on these ships. The British came to Townsend Homestead and burst open the door. They took a rifle down from the mantel and smashed it, declaring that a rebel had no right to own a gun. Samuel was arrested and led away in chains. A neighbor who supported the British Crown saw Samuel being led away, and he followed. He was good friends with the Townsends, despite their political differences, and he paid a large sum of money to the soldiers in order to gain Samuel's freedom.
That was cool. I mean, we
Yeah.
have a lot of us that have political differences, but I think we can meet in the middle to the point where we actually care about each other.
Yeah, one hopes that people could be mature enough.
Yeah.
We're not sure how happy he was to have done this after Samuel entered politics, but because of what he had done, he was allowed to stay when the British vacated. Most Tories were run off after the war.
Yeah, so I think they were probably clearing the city, and I have a feeling that Samuel Townsend said, don't touch him over there. So we said that Samuel and his wife had 8 children. Well, Robert Townsend was one of those children. He was their 5th child. 2 of his older siblings, Phoebe and Solomon I, died as infants, and older brother Samuel Jr. died of fever in 1773. His other older brother, Solomon II, was captain of the Glasgow, which was a ship owned by their Tory neighbor that had helped free their father. And although the ship belonged to a Tory, Solomon was a loyal rebel who had met up with Benjamin Franklin in London. So you can see this family is getting kind of important here. Robert was a loyal patriot as well, which led him to become a spy. George Washington had formed an intelligence ring dubbed the Culper Spy Ring. Did you ever see the series Turn?
I did not.
Basically, it was about the Culper Spy Ring.
Oh, okay.
It's a really good show. I can't remember if it was on A&E or History. I can't remember which one, but...
I mean, it's possible that I did. I'm not really good about connecting things I've watched with their titles, typically.
Yeah, it was really good. Robert joined the ring in 1778, and he used his business as a merchant as a cover. Robert's code name was Culper Jr., and he sent messages to Washington as a result of information he gathered while eavesdropping on the British. The messages were encoded with a secret numerical code and sometimes written in invisible ink using a formula developed by John Jay's brother James. Isn't that cool? He made this thing of invisible ink. We all wanted that pen when we were a kid, right? Washington used a reagent solution to make the ink visible. The Culper Spy Ring's greatest moment came when they alerted Washington to an attack on the French fleet landing in Rhode Island. Robert kept his spy work a secret from his family his entire life. It was actually not revealed until 1930.
Oh, my word.
So we're not talking any of his close family knew anything about this, and they all were supportive of the rebel cause. But he didn't want them to know he was a spy, which was probably a good idea because if any of them got caught, he didn't want them to get, maybe beaten or whatever for it.
Samuel had warned his daughter Sally not to fraternize with the enemy, but she became friendly with British house guest Lieutenant Colonel John Graves Simcoe.
Now, they do put this like he was the house guest, but again, these are people who are loyal to the rebels, to the revolutionary cause. So I don't know if they were putting up a false front and he was staying there thinking that they were supportive of, that they were Tories, or if this is just a nice way for them saying he was a house guest, but he had kind of taken over the house.
Those feelings grew, and Sally was soon in love with Simcoe. Simcoe had a friend named Major John Andre, and he would visit the Townsend home often because Simcoe was staying there. The family liked the Major. One day, Sally inadvertently overheard the plans to bribe Benedict Arnold to surrender the fort at West Point and his Patriot troops. Sally was torn. She loved a British soldier, and she was friends with Andre, but she was also a patriot, and she believed in the cause of freedom. Major Andre had this evidence of the bribery plan, and if he was caught, he would be executed. Sally told her father of the plan, and he passed the information on to his son Robert. Patriot forces caught Major Andre, and since he was out of uniform, they hanged him immediately. This prompted Lieutenant Colonel John Graves Simcoe to leave, and he left without Sally. He probably felt breaking her heart was fair with what she had done. But the truth is that he never really loved her. When he returned to England, he married his longtime sweetheart. Legend does claim that he gave Sally the first Valentine ever.
Yeah, so much for that Valentine. He goes back home and marries his longtime sweetheart, which clearly he'd had all through the war, so I think he was kind of playing Sally. And I don't know if maybe it's because they did realize that the family was working for the revolutionary cause or what have you. And now a little break for a word about one of our sponsors. I don't know if we talked about this when we did the episode on Westminster Abbey, but they have a monument to Major John Andre in there. It was designed by Robert Adam and carried out by Peter Matthias van Gelder, and it was erected in 1782 at the expense of King George III. It shows a mourning figure of Britannia with a lion seated on the top of a sarcophagus. On the front of this is a relief showing George Washington with officers in a tent receiving a petition where Andre asked for a soldier's death by firing squad and flag of truce. Major Andre is being led away to be hanged by Ensign Samuel Bowman and Captain John Hughes. A row of American soldiers is shown, and an officer, perhaps Colonel Scammell, who was in charge of the execution, stands in front of them. A woman seated beneath a tree wrings her hands in grief. Samuel died in 1790, and his family continued to live at Townsend Homestead. Phoebe lived in the home with Sarah and Robert. You might be getting confused by some of these children's names because the Townsends used the same names for a couple of the children. There were two Solomons, as you heard me say. There was Solomon the First and Solomon the Second. Well, there were two Phoebes too, but they didn't call it Phoebe 1 and Phoebe 2. But
Okay.
We've discussed this on other episodes too, where we're like, do you really want to use the same name for a child that was deceased? I guess if you really like it.
Well, it could be a family name.
Yeah. This Phoebe lived a long life and caused quite a scandal. She was what we would refer to as a cougar today. An older woman who marries a younger man. When Phoebe was 45, she married Dr. Ebenezer Seeley, who was only 26. Seeley would later become owner of the property. In 1851, a grandson named Solomon redesigned the property in the Victorian style, which was popular at the time. He added carpeting, decorative wallpaper, and ornate furnishings. It was at this time that the homestead became known as Raynham Hall because Solomon wanted to project wealth. The name is taken from the Townsend seat in Norfolk, England. And again, as I had said earlier, there doesn't seem to be a connection between the two families. Everything that I researched was saying there really is no connection between the two families, but the Townsend seat, I would assume there is some kind of a very distant connection way, way, way back when. And of course, here we have another Solomon. So I don't know if this is like Solomon the Third, the Fourth, that he was a grandson here. The house continued to pass down through the family, enduring a legal battle, being sold off for debt, and being bought back by the family again. So they were attached to this house and wanted to hold on to it. It was transformed into a tea room for a time in the 1930s and was used by the Oyster Bay Historical and Genealogical Society. A great-granddaughter deeded the home to the Daughters of the American Revolution, who eventually found it too expensive to upkeep the property. The town of Oyster Bay bought the property in 1947, and they restored the building's front area to its original look from the 18th century. The building opened as a museum in 1958, and it was listed in the National Register of Historic Places in 1974. So this does today still continue to run as a museum, and the house offers occasional ghost tours. As we mentioned, there are people who claim this is the most haunted house in Long Island.
Spiritualist healer Samantha DeFranzo is one of the tour guides at the home. DeFranzo was surprised at how friendly the spirits of the house were. She said, The spirits, especially the original owners like Samuel and Sarah Townsend, they want to connect and show that they appreciate everybody that's coming and seeing their history, and to connect with them. So, as we walk forward, they're walking with us, trying to interact with us and share their point of view.
In 1938, Raynham Hall was under the ownership of Julia Weeks Coles. She was a descendant of Samuel Townsend. So basically, this house stayed with the family almost its entire bit here until it becomes a museum. She wrote an article for the Glen Cove Record detailing some paranormal experiences that she had heard had taken place in the home. One story spoke of the apparition of a ghost rider on horseback. A woman staying overnight was awakened from her dreams by the sounds of a horse outside her window. When she looked out, she saw the spirit. Some think this is the ghost of that British soldier who was hanged, Major John Andre, who was hung for treason after paying many visits to Raynham Hall. So is he making another visit after the fact? Is he coming back because he's like, the woman who betrayed me lived here and I want some revenge?
Could be.
Others think the specter is simply a harbinger of doom. That doom generally pointed to a member of the Townsend family dying. So it's kind of like a banshee.
Ooh. Julia Coles had a sister named Sarah Townsend Halstead, and the article said she saw a little bent old man walking slowly down the hall that vanished into the darkness at the end of the hallway. Sarah thought this was the ghost of Captain Robert Townsend. Another time, Sarah went into Raynham Hall to get some books out of a cupboard in the library, but the door to the cupboard wouldn't budge. She tried everything to get it open, even using some tools. Sarah finally gave up. The next day, she tried to open the cupboard again, and it opened easily.
So then you have to wonder, was this a practical joker who was playing a prank here, or was it somebody who didn't want her to get into that cupboard and they just didn't happen to be around to guard it this time?
Who's to say? A ghost knows.
I want to know what books were in there.
Yeah, exactly.
Julia also wrote that the ghost of Robert Townsend had been seen on the stairs even though they were a newly built part of the home. The stairs are actually the most active area of the home, which kind of goes back to the fact that that picture that is so well known of the brown lady at Raynham Hall is coming down some stairs. The swishing of petticoats is heard near the base of the stairs. Michael Conlon was a worker at the home who tended to the gardens in the 1860s. His apparition has been seen out in the garden. He wears a coat with brass buttons and sometimes appears without his legs. He has dark curly hair and a mustache and beard. He must have really liked his job that he's decided he wants to do that for the rest of eternity. Staff members report hearing disembodied footsteps. A woman who rented the house as a tea room claimed to hear odd noises and phantom footsteps on the stairs. When the Daughters of the American Revolution held meetings in the house, a woman who owned a Pekingese dog would sometimes bring the dog with her. Several times, the dog became terrified and refused to pass a certain place in the floor, which makes you wonder what is standing on the floor that the dog doesn't like.
Sally Townsend's old room is always chilly and has an oppressive feeling of sadness, perhaps over her loss of her Valentine, as she died a spinster at the age of 82. We have a nose picture here. People claim to smell the scent of apple and cinnamon in the kitchen, as if reaching back from the past. Of course, this may not be strange, considering that apple scent is used in homes all the time.
Yeah, like apple-scented potpourri.
Sure. Pipe smoke is smelled as well. The scent comes from an area of the home where Samuel used to sit in front of the wood-burning stove, smoking his pipe. EVPs have been captured by investigators, and we listened to a few. On one, we did clearly hear the word Johnson, said in a lower tone. Where that name comes from, we don't know. Another was creepy as hell because you can distinctly make out the screams of someone behind the talking of an investigator. Investigators also believed that they interacted with the spirit of a little boy who identified himself as Jack. They captured him saying the name on an EVP, and he also said puppy dog in the hallway near the playroom.
Was he talking about the Pekingese dog?
Maybe.
Maybe the dog didn't like the little kid ghost because it pulled his hair or something.
I mean, some dogs don't like kids.
That's true. Susan Smitten wrote the book Ghost Stories of New York State in 2004, and in her chapter about Raynham Hall, she reports that Long Island's ghost hunters held an investigation in 2002, and they claimed to smell apple pie scents, and they caught orbs in digital photos. They captured an EVP of a voice saying, "Yes, there is," when an investigator asked if anyone was there. Gotta love that.
I love it.
I am still waiting for the day that we do an EVP session and catch an answer to a question. We've never had that happen. We've caught EVPs like in the background or when we're just walking through a place, taking a tour. but we've never had a specific answer to a question.
Right.
That's why sometimes I wonder just how well some of these EVP sessions we see on TV are going, because they get a lot of responses. People on ghost tours in 2003 encountered electronics malfunctioning, orbs in photos, lights turning off, and strange smells. A new spirit was reported in 2003, and she was described as being a very beautiful woman with upswept hair and wearing a dark floor-length dress. She was standing at the top of a staircase when she was seen. She quickly disappeared through a door. Later, guests saw her in the kitchen. They also smelled something strange, and they heard flute music playing from somewhere else in the house. There are people who claim that one of the fireplaces is a vortex. Raynham Hall Museum has been referred to as the Grand Central Station of ghosts, so maybe the things that they're interacting with here aren't necessarily from the family that had lived here.
Raynham Hall has been a museum for several decades, rather than a residence. But it would seem that someone or something is residing at this location. Are members of the Townsend family still here in spirit? Is Raynham Hall haunted?
That is for you to decide. Let us know if you've ever visited this museum in Long Island. I'm kind of bummed that we missed it when we were up in New York, but we didn't spend a whole lot of time in Long Island, so.
We bopped all over the place very quickly.
Yeah, we mostly were in Manhattan, so that was part of the problem. Want to thank you guys for tuning in to this Redux. I've been your host, Diane.
And this has been Kelly.
You take care now.
Bye-bye.